Of the many biking jerseys that I own, the one I am most proud of has the words on it in Hebrew, Tenuah HaReformit, the Reform Movement. I got these jerseys while I was biking around Israel with a group raising money for the Reform Movement in Israel. We pedaled from one Reform synagogue to the next, learning about how the government does not financially support Reform synagogues like it does Orthodox ones. And therefore, we were pedaling to raise money so that Israelis had the opportunity to choose Reform Judaism if that best met their theology. One afternoon, we emerged from a forest into this beautiful clearing, a rainbow of flowers. We stopped to get some bites to eat and to take a drink, and immediately the most deafening roar of an F-16 fighter jet, very low over our heads, taking off from just beyond the trees. We had parked ourselves next to an Air Force base. Israel can be breathtakingly beautiful, can be boldly patriotic, can be Jewishly complicated, can even be painfully oppressive at times. And I will still refer to it as my homeland all the same. Since 1948, really before, Israel has always been somewhat of a paradox. Yet as we attempt to dissect and understand the internal conflicts, we have always remained hopeful for a brighter future. For over 2,000 years, Jews have never given up hope on having a Jewish homeland. The early Zionists even codified this sentiment in choosing the national anthem Hatikva, which means the hope, and contains the verse, Od lo avda tikvatenu, atik bavat bat shnot alpayim. Our hope is not yet lost, the verse sings, a hope of 2,000 years. These words embody this deep yearning the Jews have been praying about since the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, 2,000 years ago. A hope to reestablish Jerusalem as our home and to be a free people in our own land. Over those 2 millennia, Jews have experienced persecution, removal, and destruction, with notable examples including the Crusades, the expulsion from Spain, pogroms, and the Holocaust. And finally, after 2,000 painstakingly long years of hoping and praying, we began to build a Jewish homeland. But we didn't have Jerusalem, so we continued to hope. We drained the malaria-filled swamps. We began planting fruit and palm trees, and once again tasted the milk and honey flowing from our fertile soil. We continued to hope. And in 1967, a miracle and a calamity occurred simultaneously as the dust settled on a horrific war. Israel had reclaimed Jerusalem. 2,000 years of hope were embodied in one iconic image of men and women standing in front of the Western Wall, still in their paratrooper gear. But that moment also began decades of occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. And still, we maintained hope. We even survived the Yom Kippur War 50 years ago today, when Israel's neighbors coordinated an attack attempting to catch us off guard during our most vulnerable day, when we bare our souls and ask for forgiveness. But still we had hope. Od lo adva tikvatenu, through it all, we hoped. Hatikva was written by Naftali Herz Imber in 1878. It became a popular folk song for the ardent Zionists at the time. 50 years later, the song was officially adopted as the anthem for this growing movement, because like the dream to rebuild Jerusalem, Jews have always held on to hope. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory, the past chief rabbi of the UK, teaches that Jews invented hope. The Torah, he notes, is a story with a beginning but no end, containing stories about the possibilities of the future, and at the heart of Judaism is the belief in humankind. Judaism becomes Judaism becomes the voice of hope in the conversation of mankind. Hope, he notes, is different than optimism. Optimism is the belief that things will get better, but hope is the belief that we can make things better. Optimism is passive, while hope is active. It takes no courage to be an optimist, but it takes a great deal of courage to have hope. Even before Israel was founded, however, early Zionists debated whether we define ourselves by optimism or hope. Not everyone wanted Hatikva to become the national anthem. Theodor Herzl, considered to be the founder of modern Zionism, disliked Hatikva, but he couldn't find a suitable alternative. And Rav Kook, the first chief rabbi of Israel, objected so much that he proposed an alternative entitled Ha'emunah, the faith, which speaks of a return to the land in which we will all serve God. Rav Kook's poem was rejected by the majority secularist pioneers, who knew that while God gave us the tools, it is up to us to continue and ultimately finish the work of perfecting our world. The founders of Israel had the courage to choose hope over optimism. Most Israelis have and continue to embrace action and hope, and for many, they have no choice. They live on that very land. That is not only their homeland, it is their home. However, for much of our relationship, Israelis have asked the American Jewish community to simply have faith. Not to partner or politic, but to simply watch, wait, and donate. For decades, Israelis have asked American Jews for financial and military support, but rejected any attempt to influence the direction of the Jewish state. And for decades, we have been happy to oblige. Together, we perpetuated the myth that we can't possibly understand what life is like in Israel unless we live there. And therefore, those in the diaspora should not criticize the Israeli people or its government. Yet, we are still expected to send money and to pressure our government to send weapons. As a child, I was taught, like many, that Israel is perfect, and I assumed it was. I believed that evenings in Israel were like I experienced them growing up at Jewish summer camp. We sang and clapped and danced around in circles. I thought everyone lived in harmony, sharing the bounty harvested on the kibbutz while singing Hebrew and espousing the highest of our Jewish values. As a child, we never spoke about, nor did I think to ask about the non-Jewish population that was displaced in 1948 or 67, or who are continuing to live in this land. I knew that people, especially her neighbors, hated Israel, but I assumed that hatred was based in rootless anti-Semitism, not fact. I remember watching Yitzhak Rabin and Mahmoud Abbas shaking hands 30 years ago during the Oslo Accords, and I thought, peace has come. Od lo avda tikvatenu. Our hope was not lost, or so I thought. We began to see cracks in the facade when just 2 years later, Yitzhak Rabin was murdered by a fellow Jew who objected to his pursuing peace with the Palestinians. But we didn't lose hope. We thought this murderer was an outlier. But today we know that he was the symptom of a movement that has since grown in numbers and strength. Israel's facade continued to crack further as resistance to the occupation grew, as illegal settlements became cities, and some settlers became violent towards Palestinians. And the facade fell down like a theater backdrop earlier this year, revealing the deep rifts within Israeli society as hundreds of thousands of people filled the streets, 600,000 in one night by some counts, protesting the move by the far-right government to consolidate power. Led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the government passed a judicial reform bill, which would prevent the Supreme Court from overruling laws passed in the Knesset. This law could allow this government or a future government to limit the rights of the queer community, erode gender equality, and lead Israel further away from peace and toward a future neighboring Palestinian state. It could also erode the rights of Reform and conservative Jews around the world. It could mean that a government could narrow the law of return currently, which states that one is eligible to return and make aliyah, citizenship to Israel, if they have one Jewish grandparent. But this law could allow a government to narrow that so that a child born to a non-Jewish mother and their children, or people converted by Reform rabbis, would be denied citizenship in their own land. Our children could be denied citizenship. Israel lacks a constitution and therefore relies upon the Supreme Court to set precedent and protect the rights of all people, Jews and non-Jews, especially when the government fails to do so. Last week, the Supreme Court, oddly enough, heard a challenge to the very law, the judicial reform law, that erodes their own authority. And if the Supreme Court nullifies the judicial reform law, the Knesset will then have to decide, based upon the judicial reform law, will they choose to accept the ruling of the Supreme Court whose very authority they are attempting to erode. A uniquely Israeli paradox. In the days before the High Holy Days, when Israelis, whether they are secular or traditional, usually pause for an entire month, they say, Acharei HaChagim, after the holidays we'll deal with it. Israel's streets were again filled with hundreds of thousands of protesters. The future of Israel is in jeopardy, and I know that a growing number of people are beginning to lose hope. Israeli Supreme Court Justice Isaac Amit said 2 weeks ago during the hearing, I am not concerned about extreme scenarios. Democracy doesn't die from a few strong blows. Democracy dies in a few small steps. Israel has been taking a series of small steps for decades, allowing a growing number of extremists into positions of power who were formerly considered outside the pale. People who follow the same extremist views as the man, the Jew, who murdered Yitzhak Rabin. Two current members of Knesset, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, were barred from running just a few years ago to be members of the Knesset for their racist and radical ideas. Both have espoused vile, horrific comments about the Palestinian people, and today they wield incredible power over the same Palestinian people. They are now the ministers of security and finance. We cannot let Israel die through a series of small steps. We must have the courage to hope and to make Israel better. For months, prominent Israeli politicians and scholars have joined the call to stop this law. Among them, reservists who said they will refuse to show up for active duty, a move that could cripple the Israeli Defense Forces. The high-tech industry, long a source of pride, has threatened to go on strike. And as we American Jews witness this tragedy, we are beginning to lose hope, leading to an erosion of American Jewish support of Israel. Many are no longer willing to be optimistic that Israel itself will choose the right path. We want to act. Our fate, our ability to return to our homeland is in jeopardy. Od lo avda tikvatenu. Our 2,000-year-old hope will not be lost because we will not stand idly by. We will join the calls of the protesters to stand up because we have an existential connection to this land, a bond that compels us to act. We will engage actively by giving to institutions and causes in Israel that represent our values, supporting the protesters, supporting LGBTQ rights, working toward a peaceful two-state solution, and supporting the reform movement in Israel. We will travel to Israel to connect and reconnect with our land and our institutions, and at the same time we will advocate for our values to shine. And we will learn. Starting in October, we will have an opportunity through a class I will be teaching to engage in a series of conversations as we explore a new framework for our relationship with Israel. We will consider what it means to be a member of the Jewish people and conceive of ways to sustain and grow the story of our people both in Israel and in North America. Using a core curriculum developed by the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, we'll watch video lectures, study both our ancient and our modern texts, and learn more about the current Israeli political crisis. You can learn more on our website. Together, we will uncover sources of hope. Od lo adva tikvatenu, hatikva bat shnot alpayim. Our 2,000-year-old hope is not lost, because we won't lose hope, not yet. For 2,000 years, our ancestors worked to preserve and pass along our tradition while turning their eyes to Jerusalem. And we will do the same because we know that Israel is the place where no matter what happens, we can be a free people in our own land. That if Israel returns to be her best, Israel can be a land of hope for everyone. And together we pray for peace.